Hello and welcome to this chess endgame review of opposite colored bishops. And for those beginners and those learning, I don't mean a black bishop and a white bishop. I mean that one bishop covers dark squares and the other one covers light squares. And because of this, the games can often lead to draws or very drawish positions. And so this first example here, it's white's turn to move. So what would you do in this position with white? How would you try and break through and promote one of your pawns here? And as we will see, that is very difficult because of these opposite colored bishops. And you can pause the video if you want to look at this further. If not, I will reveal the answer here. So we see that in this position, white is ahead, of course, with these two pawns, but he is not able to get the win here because of this opposite colored bishop, as we'll see. And let's say white tries bishop to d5, checking the king. And so the king has two options: move into the corner or retreat out to the center here. Now, if we look at the evaluation here, it looks like it would be bad news for black to go into the corner because then this would be possible. King moving towards the other side here. And because of these opposite colored bishops, the king can operate on the light squares, as the bishop is only covering these dark squares. So after the bishop just retreats back and forth here, and the king cannot move because he is trapped by these pawns and the bishop, this dark squared bishop will just move back and forth, keeping an eye on this diagonal, because if the pawns would move here, then the dark squared bishop could just capture, and after recapture, the king and bishop could not win here. So the game may continue. Well, one example is this bishop to c3 move. The king heads towards the center, and now the king is able to move, but after the king moves again, cutting off the black king, we have the king moving back into the corner. And then after king to f8, the bishop would just check the king, but the king is able to move here to f7. And this allows the king to cover the advance of the pawns and cover this queening square, and white would win in this case. So after this move, capture, capture, the king would have to retreat here and the pawn would queen. So another example, if we go back here to this beginning move. So after bishop to d5 check in the very beginning, if the king once again goes into this corner and white moves around to help try and cover this queening square, in the game we saw bishop just moving back to c3. If bishop to f6 is played here, the king cannot capture, or that would lead to stalemate. But once again, the king would just move around, trying to reposition towards the queening square. And after bishop to g5, threatening to capture here, well, then we would just have g7 and a block by the king, king to f5, attacking the bishop, and the king moving here, but g8 queen, king captures, and a mate here. So these are possible ways that white could win. And so if we go back to the beginning position, we'll see that after check by the bishop, the black king must move towards the center and not get trapped in the corner, causing many problems. All right, so after the king moves to f8, then we would have g7 here, which is possible, but this would just lead to a capture here, and if recapture, the king captures, and that would lead to a draw, as king and bishop once again cannot checkmate the king. And another example would be after bishop to d5, king to f8. Instead of g7, if h7 were played, well then this bishop would just blockade these squares. If let's see, g7 is played, that keeps the king away. This king is on the dark square. The defending black king can just cover here with the bishop, and no progress would be made here. So it would just lead to a draw. So this first example highlights how drawish these positions are with opposite colored bishops, because the bishops only control half of the board, and so it is very difficult because of that to make an advance and win. But now this next example, let me turn off these lines and evaluations. All right, so this next example highlights how white has a chance to win in these opposite colored bishop endgames. So very often there are draws, but sometimes white would be able to win, as we'll see in this example. So what would you do to win the game in this position? Take a look at it, see what you think. Pause the video if you need to think further. If not, we will continue here. All right. So evaluation. It looks like white is winning here in the evaluation, but how does he finish this game off? How does he get the win here? All right, so it looks like the best move is bishop to g5, which, along with these pawns, covers and cuts off a lot of these squares, keeping the king away from these pawns. And so the king has a choice here of where to move. Let's say he moves to f7. Well, then the king will go to d4 and head to the opposite side, and he is staying on these dark squares. He will try and swing around on the dark squares where this bishop has no influence, as he only covers the light squares. So the bishop will have to move back and forth here to help cover the advance or possible advance of the white pawn. So right now, if a pawn would just move forward, the bishop could capture, recapture, and the king would capture. And once again, a king and bishop cannot defeat a king. So after bishop to a2. Now, before I go further, let's take a quick look. Instead of a2, if the bishop moved to c2, attacking this pawn, well then we would have e6 check, and because of this bishop helping to cover the dark squares here, the king would be pressed back, trying to stay in front of the pawns. But then we have king to e5, covering this pawn and allowing this pawn to advance forward. And the bishop cannot capture this pawn, or the king would recapture, and white would still have this extra pawn along with his bishop. He would be able to promote that. All right, so now if we go back, instead of that bishop to c2 move, bishop to a2, well, the game could continue with king advancing up here towards the middle, bishop just moving back and forth. The king moves to the other side, And this, once again, this bishop just moves back and forth. But now we have e6 protected by the king. So the bishop cannot capture now, or we just have a recapture and white has this extra passed pawn. So king to e8, and now f6 here. So the pawns would make progress and eventually promote. So let's go back to the main line of the game. After bishop to g5 check, if the king goes in this direction, well then once again the white king heads in the opposite direction. The bishop just moves back and forth. And then we have bishop to h4. Now, if we would have f6 in this position, we see then the game would be drawn because the king could just move in here and along with the bishop help block these pawns from making any more progress because black would control these light squares here. So white must avoid that. And so instead, he just moves his bishop back. And if we have bishop to c4, the game may proceed like this. King moving around to the other side, bishop to d5, the king slowly moving forward, and now a pawn is able to make progress here because the king has to retreat away. So now the king moves to this side, white gains the opposition, and now this bishop, running out of ideas, retreats back and tries to reposition, but the king can just move down out of the way of this f pawn, and after an attack the pawn moves forward. And so the game may continue in this manner where slowly white makes progress here. And in this position, the pawn would just move forward and promote, protected by the bishop. And so this is one way that white could win here. All right, so if I go back, instead of this bishop to c4 move, if we had after bishop to h4, instead of bishop just moving to c4, another option is bishop to f7, jumping up in front of the pawns. So this helps prevent this pawn from moving, as the bishop could capture, and if recapture, then we would have a capture. And once again, the bishop and king cannot checkmate. So continuing on, king to g5, moving around to the other side from where the black king went. And if the king tries to come back, we have this move, a discovered check, and then the king has to move again, and then king to g7, bishop moves. Now the king protects the pawns, and slowly, after some maneuvering back and forth here, one of the pawns can press forward, and the king once again goes back behind the pawns to allow this other pawn to move forward. So finally the pawns move forward, and king to d8 here, and after f7, white would promote a pawn and be winning. And instead of king to d8, after f6 here, if the king instead went this direction, then we have check, king to e8, f7 check, and the pawn would promote. So there's a lot going on in these opposite colored bishop endgames. That's all I'll go over today for that. But feel free to set up these positions on a board or on your computer and just play around with them. because they can come in handy, especially if you are behind and you're trying to defend and save a draw. And also, if you're winning and you need to learn how to press your pawns forward. I did an earlier video on opposite colored bishops, so you can check that out on my Nick Butts chess channel. And I'll probably do some more of these opposite colored bishop endgames in the future, as they're valuable to learn and know, and they can come up in your games, or you can steer an endgame into this opposite bishop ending if you're trying to save a draw, especially. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions, and have a great day, everyone.